Hey everybody, it's Whitney from All the Shelves. Today I'm filming a review of Tana French's latest book, The Trespasser. I really liked this. It is not my very favorite in her series, but it is up there with some of my favorites, and so at the end of this video I will also do little mini reviews of all the books in the Dublin Murder Squad series. So if you're interested in what I thought of the entire series and how this fits in, then stick around. So first of all, if you aren't familiar with Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad series, this, The Trespasser, is the 6th book in that series, but it is not a series that you have to read in order by any means. And I don't just mean that like with other series where the stories sort of clue you in on where and what is going on in the series. This is actually something that really can be read out of order depending on what you're interested in, because the stories are only kind of tangentially connected. You have detectives that are all working in this murder squad, so some characters show up in each novel, but the books focus on one detective from each squad at a time, and some of those detectives like drop off at the end of their stories, or they move around to different squads or whatever, so there really isn't a purpose to reading them in any kind of order. I will say though that with The Trespasser it was kind of fun to read this after The Secret Place, because Detective Antoinette, which is the main character in The Trespasser, was also one of the kind of main characters in The Secret Place. It's very similar to what she does in the first and second book, where she takes the other side of the partnership and focuses in on their narrative point of view. So Antoinette was a kind of side character, the partner of the main character in The Secret Place, and now she's the main character of her own book, which I like a whole lot better. I find Antoinette much more interesting than her partner. The murder in The Trespasser is of this woman who seems to have everything all figured out, like put together. She has the right drapes and the right decorations in her home. She looks exactly right. She has dyed blonde hair. She's the perfect kind of thinness, and something that continually comes up in British books, which I don't understand why, and maybe some of my British listeners could tell me about this preoccupation, but fake tan. Like, so many books that I read from Britain, especially mysteries, talk about characters having fake tans, and that's like supposed to be like a real clear sign of who they are. I just don't really know people here with fake tan, so it's interesting. Anyway, that might just be like a Utah thing versus other parts of the country too, I don't know. I'm on a total tangent. Anyway, this girl apparently has a fake tan, and she's discovered in her house with her head bashed in. She has fallen on the fireplace on the hearth and hit her head, or somebody has hit it for her and then she hit her head. The detectives aren't quite sure yet. The thing that I love about Tana French's novels is that as soon as they get to that crime scene, they are meticulous about it. They uncover every fiber that they possibly can. They go through all of the evidence, all the positioning, all of the decorations, everything in that house. And as somebody who loves procedurals, that is exactly what I'm looking for from a mystery. Not that I am ever able to put it together. I never know who done it, like ever. I never have guessed who done it. But I still like getting the little details, because the part about true crime and mysteries and murder scenes that I'm interested in is how people put together the puzzle. So without knowing all of the clues, I can't really see how they're putting it together. I don't like surprise endings. Detective Antoinette, who, like I said, is the protagonist of this novel, has been picked on in her department. She came in as a kind of like brash female who was taking no nonsense from any of these dudes around her, and of course they immediately resent her for it, or at least that's how she perceives it. And all of these guys are just kind of like picking on her, not treating her like a professional, and someone like pees in her locker at one point, like they're just being like disgusting to her. And really what drives her crazy is that she's getting all of the terrible cases. Like, she gets ones that are very obviously like domestic murders, or like barroom brawls or something like that, where she feels like she's not being able to put her detective skills to use. So they get this case, and it seems very obvious that it was the woman who's murdered. It was her date that came over and murdered her and then fled the scene, and it seems like really cut and dry. So Antoinette is just thinking, oh great, this is another one of those really straightforward cases that they just like hoist off on me to take care of their paperwork, you know. But at the same time, her and her partner Steve are like desperate to uncover a more intricate plot. Not because that's necessarily the truth behind this murder, but because it would make their lives more interesting and somehow raise up their status in their department. And that's what I really liked about The Trespasser, and what I like about Tana French's books in general, is they have these mysteries at the core of them, and you want to find out who committed this murder or other heinous crimes that go on in these books, but there is always a bigger idea about rationality and the way that people think through problems that I find very interesting. It's the psychological parts of her novel that are so fascinating to me. And the one in this book seems like particularly relevant in 2016. Basically, she's describing a society of post-truth. That's a word that's been thrown about on the internet a lot, but it's about like her, Antoinette, and her partner are trying to find this plot that may or may not exist, but as they look for the clues that are going to back up their own ideas, they become so sure that this plot does exist, that it's much more intricate than this domestic abuse case, even though the facts don't necessarily support that, and you watch them dig themselves deeper into this weird plot, and as a reader you know that they're way off base. You're just thinking like, Tana French is more careful than this. She would give us some clues to help us know that this was going to be the case, this intricate plot, but you know, she hasn't given us any of those clues, so we know that Antoinette and Steve are just like desperately forcing a narrative on this murder that's not there, which I think is something that we are seeing in this country right now. It seems right now that there is this desire to form complicated narratives about things that maybe not necessarily so complicated, and I actually saw something today about Umberto Eco's 14 signs of fascism. It's been going around the internet too, and one of those signs was that you do assign a plot, a nefarious plot to a group of people to help like solidify your own power. If you have this plot where you are the hero and somebody else is the villain, then it is very clear the actions that everyone has to take, because we've all read stories and seen movies and we know how to fight evil, right? But the fact that people in power create these narrative arcs is really interesting. So that's not quite in this novel, but there are moments in the novel where she mentions things like that people will believe what they want to believe without any support of facts, but just because, you know, their hearts believe it, and so they're going to believe it, and no matter how many facts you give them, they don't really care. It's all about feelings and emotions. And so while this novel doesn't get directly political, it's definitely picking up on these threads of, I'm gonna just say it, fascist ideology that people are kind of seeing emerge, not just this year, but for the past few years. I would definitely recommend Trespasser. It's a fine place to start with Tana French. It's not my very favorite Tana French though, so I thought I would go through all 6 of Tana French's novels and just give you like a very brief synopsis about why I like it and where it sort of falls in an order. So I'll start with number 6, which was The Secret Place. I reviewed this a couple months ago. It was not my favorite, and I think part of the reason it wasn't my favorite was because I had such high hopes. It's about a boarding school, a girls' boarding school. There is a female detective involved, and it's about potential teenage killers. These are all things that I'm fascinated by, but it just really fell short. There was a kind of magical element that I didn't love about it, but mostly it was the narrative voice, the first-person narration in it of Steve, actually the partner in The Trespasser. I didn't love his narration, and I also hated the teenage slang. I just felt like she got that totally wrong. I know I'm not from Ireland, and so maybe Irish teenagers do talk like this, but if they do, like, I don't want to know them. I know you don't. I've watched your Irish videos. You don't talk like this, so she got that off. My number 5 is Faithful Place, just because I don't remember it all that well, and so it didn't really stick with me. I remember that there is a family at the core of it, and that this family has a lot of drama about which brothers and sisters talk to which ones, and how the mom fits into all of this, and how there might have been like a murder in the past. But just because this one doesn't quite stick with me, I have to assume that it is not one of my favorites, because a few of the rest of them have really kind of haunted me. I think that this book, The Trespasser, is my number 4, not my very favorite, but I still really enjoyed it. The one part that I didn't love about it still is the Antoinette-Steve partnership. They are not my favorite characters. But like I said, that doesn't mean I don't like it, because I actually really enjoyed this. My number 3 favorite is The Likeness. I actually, like, adored the reading experience of reading The Likeness. I loved it. I read it so fast. I loved every word. It was so much fun, but I have to push it down to number 3. It's not my very favorite. Just because of the plausibility of it. The story is about a detective who looks exactly the same as a woman who turns up murdered, and so she decides to pretend to be this murdered woman and live with like the murdered woman's roommates, and she looks so much like her that the roommates don't know. It's like an undercover situation. I'm sorry, but I don't care like if my best friend had an identical twin who was like exactly the same, I'm gonna know it's not her. And I don't even live with her anymore. If I were to live with her, I'd know within seconds, you know? It's absurd. But it's so much fun, and it's about evil grad students. So as a graduate student myself, I know that those people exist. I might be one of them, and it's fun to read about their shenanigans. My second favorite novel in the Dublin Murder Squad series is In the Woods. This was the first book. I was very much surprised by this book. I thought I was just going to be reading like a fluff mystery novel in the midst of all the stuff I was reading for class, and I ended up being proven totally wrong. It's not just fluff. It was quite complex. The psychological element was the strongest it's ever been in that first novel. It's about a detective who has basically been compelled to join the murder squad because of a terrible event that happened in his childhood. He walks into the woods with a friend, if I'm remembering correctly, and all they can find of the friend are shoes filled with blood. I believe that's the plot. It has been quite a while. But I just remember really loving the procedural stuff in this book too. And I remember the plot being very believable in this one rather than like The Likeness, where it got really unbelievable. And my very favorite Dublin Murder Squad novel is Broken Harbor. This is 2 books ago. I thought that this one was the most interesting to me on a thematic level. I did make a long video about this one, so if you want to watch my long review of that, I will link that down below. It was about the difference between classical detective and hard-boiled detective stories, and I felt like this one was a very hard-boiled type story because it was really questioning the reliability of rationality and the idea that you could contain a murder rationally and explain all of the elements away when really it's just this outburst of violence, and how can you explain violence? So I loved that part of it. I also loved how it commented on current events because it was about a house that was a part of a failed housing project, and so they had like no neighbors. It was this really creepy setting, basically like an undeveloped neighborhood where only every 3 houses was occupied, and there was rubble around, and you know, no trees or grass. Like, it's just so unfinished. That setting was really cool to me. So that is my review of Tana French's The Trespasser and little mini reviews of her Dublin Murder Squad series. I would totally recommend this series. They're a little bit slow moving sometimes, but the psychological unpacking of each character is so thorough and so complex that I think that it's still a page turner, oddly, even though very little happens in each book. I just really, really love them. And if you have any recommendations for me based on my love of these books, please let me know. I'm looking for another series now that I'm totally caught up with Tana French, and I would love your input. So I'll see you later.